Before the expensive cars, before the city lights, before people started calling them successful, they were just two young people from a small village, a girl with tired hands and a boy with impossible dreams. Her name was Malika. Simple, quiet, the kind of woman people often overlook, not because she lacked beauty, but because her beauty wasn't loud. It lived in small things, in the way she spoke gently, in the way she helped others without being asked, in the way she stayed loyal, even when life became difficult. When she married Jahangir, he had almost nothing. No business, no connections, no rich family. Only ambition, and ambition alone doesn't pay bills. They rented a tiny apartment in the city, one room, thin walls, cold winters, hot summers. Sometimes the electricity stopped working. Sometimes they counted coins just to buy bread. But Malika never complained, not once. While Jahangir worked outside, trying to grow his small business, Malika worked beside him in every invisible way. She cooked late at night so he could wake up early. She packed orders, answered customer calls, kept records in old notebooks. And when money became tight, she quietly sold her wedding jewelry without telling him, because she believed something simple. If he succeeds, we both succeed. Years passed. Slowly, their hard work began to pay off. The tiny apartment became a bigger home. The borrowed furniture became luxury furniture. The struggling business became a successful company. People started admiring them. They're lucky. They became rich so fast. But no one saw the nights they cried from exhaustion. No one saw Malika falling asleep at the kitchen table while waiting for Jahangir to come home. No one saw the sacrifices, because sacrifice is usually invisible. Then children came, one, then another, and slowly Malika disappeared inside responsibilities: school lunches, laundry, homework, cleaning, cooking, parent meetings, sick nights, endless routines. While Jahangir's world became bigger, hers became smaller. Not because she wanted less, but because someone had to hold the family together. And she did, silently, faithfully, completely. At first, Jahangir appreciated her. He used to say, "I couldn't do this without you." And he meant it, back then. But success changes people, slowly, dangerously, especially people who forget who stood beside them in the beginning. Jahangir started coming home later, then even later. Phone always busy, meetings, trips, excuses. At first, Malika ignored it, because trust makes people blind. But then came the perfume, not hers. The messages, late-night smiles while staring at his phone, and the silence, the dangerous kind. One evening, Malika stood in the kitchen, watching the clock, dinner cold, children asleep, and somewhere deep inside, she already knew, because women often know the truth long before it is spoken. She just wasn't ready to hear it out loud. The truth didn't arrive suddenly. It came in pieces, small changes, cold conversations, late nights, long silences. The kind of silence that slowly replaces love. Jahangir used to tell her everything. Now he barely looked at her. He came home late, ate quietly, scrolled through his phone, then slept facing the other side of the bed, as if distance could exist even between two people lying inches apart. Malika noticed everything. Of course she did. Women notice the smallest changes, the different perfume, the way he smiled at messages, The sudden care about his appearance, the expensive shirts, the gym memberships, the secretive phone calls, and most painful of all, the way he no longer looked at her, not with love, not with warmth, not even with attention, as if she had become part of the furniture. One evening, she finally asked, not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly, "Is there someone else?" Jahangir froze for half a second, then sighed, not guilty, not ashamed, just annoyed. And that reaction hurt more than anything, because guilty people still care. Indifference is colder, much colder. He placed his phone on the table, looked at her, then said the words that would destroy something inside her forever. Yes. Silence. Heavy, sharp, final. Malika stared at him, waiting, hoping maybe there was more, an explanation, regret, something. But Jahangir simply leaned back and said, "You've changed." Her hands trembled slightly. "What does that mean?" she whispered. He laughed softly, not kindly, tiredly. "You're boring now, Malika." That sentence felt unreal. Boring. After everything. After all the sacrifices. After building a life together from nothing. After raising his children. After giving him her youth, her energy, her loyalty. She became boring. You only talk about children, about the house. You don't care about yourself anymore. Malika looked down at her hands, the same hands that packed his products at night, the same hands that cooked for him, the same hands that held their crying children while he built his empire. And suddenly, she understood something terrifying. While she was busy protecting the family, she forgot herself. And now, the man she helped build was choosing someone else. "She makes me feel alive," Jahangir said openly. No shame, no hesitation, as if honesty somehow made betrayal cleaner. Malika felt her chest tighten, not from anger, from heartbreak, because the cruelest pain is hearing someone you love speak about loving someone else. Speak about loving someone else. "I didn't plan this," he continued. "But I deserve happiness too." Happiness. That word echoed in her mind, as if everything she gave him meant nothing, as if the years together were suddenly invisible. Malika stood up slowly, couldn't breathe inside that room anymore, couldn't look at him, couldn't survive another second hearing his voice. So she walked out, without shoes, without a coat, without saying anything. And outside, rain was falling heavily, cold, relentless, perfectly matching the storm inside her. She sat on a bench near the road, completely soaked, crying silently, not caring who saw her, because sometimes pain becomes too big to hide. Cars passed, people walked by, but no one stopped, until an old woman slowly approached her, wrinkled face, calm eyes, wise silence. She looked at Malika for a long moment, then said quietly, "Crying solves nothing. Pause. Fix the problem." And with that, the old woman kept walking into the rain. But those words stayed deep inside Malika, because for the first time that night, she stopped feeling like a victim and started thinking. The rain continued falling, cold, heavy, merciless. But Malika no longer noticed it, because something inside her had changed. Just an hour ago, she sat there broken, humiliated, abandoned. But now, another feeling slowly appeared, clarity. Pain was still there, of course it was, but beneath the pain, something stronger was growing. Awareness. She replayed the old woman's words again. Crying solves nothing. Simple sentence, but powerful, because deep down, Malika understood something. For years, she built everyone else's life, her husband's success, her children's comfort, her family's peace. But somewhere along the way, she stopped building herself, and people often forget the value of things that stop growing. Malika wiped her tears slowly, then stood up, her clothes soaked, her heart shattered, but her mind finally awake. She walked back home quietly, step by step, not as the same woman who left, but as someone standing at the edge of change. The house lights were still on. Jahangir sat in the living room scrolling through his phone, relaxed, comfortable, as if he had just finished an ordinary conversation. He looked up when she entered. "You're back," he said casually. No concern, no guilt, no fear of losing her, because he believed something dangerous, that she would never leave. Women who sacrifice everything often become predictable to men, and predictable things are taken for granted. Malika stood there silently for a moment, looking at him, really looking at him, the man she once admired, the man she defended, the man she helped build, and suddenly, he looked smaller, not physically, but morally. "You can go to her," Malika said calmly. Jahangir frowned slightly. "What?" "You heard me. No yelling, no begging, no dramatic tears. Just calmness." And somehow, that calmness unsettled him more. "You want to leave?" he asked carefully. Malika shook her head. "No." Pause. "You leave." Silence filled the room instantly, because this was not the reaction he expected. "I'll stay here with the children," she continued. "You can visit them whenever you want." Jahangir stared at her, confused, almost suspicious. "Are you serious?" "Yes." Still calm, still controlled. "But if you want your freedom, you'll also take responsibility." Now he listened carefully. "You will send $1,000 every month for the children. You'll call them, you'll spend time with them, and you will never make them feel abandoned." Each sentence precise, clear, strong, not spoken like a broken woman, spoken like someone setting rules. For the first time that night, Jahangir looked uncomfortable, because power had shifted, slightly, but noticeably. "I didn't think you'd react like this," he admitted. Malika almost smiled. Neither did she. Jahangir stood up slowly, and strangely, he looked relieved, because in his mind, everything became easier now. No fights, no scandal, no guilt. Freedom. That's what he thought this was. "You're doing the right thing," he said. Those words would have destroyed her before, but now they only made her see him more clearly. He packed a bag that same night, quickly, almost too quickly, and Malika noticed how easily a man can walk away from the life a woman spent years protecting. Before leaving, he stopped near the door. "Take care of yourself," he said. Funny, because he hadn't cared about that for years. Then he left. The door closed softly, and silence filled the house. Deep silence. Children sleeping upstairs, rain still falling outside, and Malika standing alone in the middle of the living room. For the first time in years, she had no husband to cook for, no man waiting for her attention, no one demanding pieces of her. And strangely, underneath the heartbreak, she felt something else. Space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to finally ask herself one question. Who am I without everyone else? And that question would change everything. The first morning felt strange, too quiet, too empty. For years, Malika's life began with someone else's needs, preparing breakfast, ironing clothes, packing lunches, answering calls, cleaning messes, managing schedules, running endlessly without ever stopping to ask herself one thing: what do I want? But this morning, there was no husband waiting downstairs, no irritated voice calling her name, no pressure to keep everything perfect, only silence. And sometimes, silence is terrifying, because silence forces you to meet yourself. Malika stood in front of the mirror for a long time, longer than usual, not fixing makeup, not adjusting clothes, just looking, really looking, at the woman staring back. Tired eyes, loose hair, skin that hadn't felt care in years, not because she was ugly, but because she disappeared inside responsibilities. She touched her own face slowly, almost unfamiliar. "When was the last time I cared about myself?" she whispered, and she couldn't remember. That realization hurt more than Jahangir's betrayal, because betrayal from others is painful, but abandoning yourself is even worse. The children woke up. Life continued. Breakfast still needed cooking, laundry still waited, school still existed. Motherhood didn't pause for heartbreak, and somehow that helped, because movement keeps people alive even when their hearts are broken. Days passed, then weeks. Jahangir sent money exactly as promised, called the children sometimes, visited occasionally, and every time he came, he looked happier, relaxed, free, like a man who believed he escaped responsibility. At first, those visits destroyed Malika internally, especially when she smelled another woman's perfume on his clothes, especially when he smiled at his phone the same way he once smiled at her. But slowly, something unexpected happened. She stopped watching him, stopped waiting for explanations, stopped hoping he would regret it, because another focus entered her life: herself. At night, after the children slept, Malika started studying online, quietly, secretly. Business courses, marketing, languages, finance, things she once believed were not for women like her. At first, it felt impossible, her brain tired quickly, her confidence weak. Sometimes she cried from frustration, not because lessons were hard, but because she realized how long she spent believing she wasn't capable of more. But every day, she continued. One lesson, one page, one step. Slowly, the woman inside her began waking up again. She changed small things first, started walking in the mornings, drinking more water, taking care of her skin, reading books instead of crying at night, buying clothes because she liked them, not because someone else approved. And something powerful began happening. She stood straighter, spoke differently, looked people in the eyes more. Not because she became someone new, but because she slowly returned to the person she forgot. Months passed, and people started noticing. Neighbors, friends, even her children. "Mom, you smile more now," her daughter said one evening. Malika froze slightly, because children notice truth faster than adults. That night, she looked in the mirror again. Same mirror, same woman, but different eyes. Alive eyes. And for the first time in years, she didn't see a tired wife. She saw potential, real potential. Meanwhile, Jahangir remained distracted by his new life. Beautiful restaurants, trips, expensive gifts for another woman, temporary excitement disguised as happiness. He believed he upgraded his life, but he didn't realize something dangerous. While he was busy chasing excitement, the woman he left behind was becoming someone extraordinary. And one day, he would finally notice. Too late. Almost a year passed. Not quickly, not easily, but powerfully. Time changed many things, especially Malika. The woman who once cried alone in the rain was no longer the same person. Not because pain disappeared, but because pain transformed her into discipline, into awareness, into strength. Every morning now, she woke up before sunrise, not out of exhaustion, out of purpose. She exercised, studied, worked remotely for small companies, learned digital marketing, improved her English, read books about confidence, business, and psychology. At first, people around her were surprised, then impressed, then inspired, because transformation is impossible to ignore. Even her children noticed the difference. Their mother laughed more now, dressed differently, spoke differently, moved differently. There was light in her again. Not the light of a woman loved by a man, but the light of a woman who finally learned her own value. And that kind of confidence changes everything. One afternoon, Jahangir came to visit the children. Like always, casual, relaxed, certain the house remained emotionally frozen without him. He parked outside while speaking on the phone, laughing, confident, the kind of confidence men have when they believe they are irreplaceable. He walked toward the door absent-mindedly, still scrolling through messages. Then the front door opened, and Jahangir stopped walking, completely, because standing there was a woman he didn't recognize. Elegant black dress, simple but expensive-looking makeup, healthy, glowing skin, confident posture, beautiful. Not loudly beautiful, powerfully beautiful, the kind of beauty that comes from inner peace. For 2 full seconds, he genuinely thought he had entered the wrong house. "Excuse me," he started awkwardly, then froze again, because the woman smiled slightly and said, "Are you not coming in?" Jahangir stared, his face changing instantly. "Malika?" She nodded calmly, and somehow that calmness shocked him more than her appearance, because he expected bitterness, pain, neediness. Not this, not confidence, not control. His eyes moved over her again involuntarily, as if trying to connect this woman to the exhausted wife he left behind. But he couldn't, because the old Malika truly no longer existed. "You look," he began, then stopped because no word felt safe enough to say. Different? Beautiful? Alive? None of them captured it. Meanwhile, something ugly twisted quietly inside him. Jealousy. Unexpected, sharp, dangerous. Not because another man stood there, but because suddenly he realized other men would notice her. And for the first time since leaving, that thought terrified him. The children ran downstairs excitedly, breaking the tension. Jahangir hugged them automatically, but his attention kept drifting back toward Malika, watching her move through the house, listening to her speak, noticing the confidence in her voice, the peace in her energy. And suddenly, his glamorous new relationship felt strangely shallow, because excitement fades, but depth is rare, very rare. While the children played, he finally asked carefully, "Did you meet someone?" The question came out sharper than intended, almost angry, almost possessive. Malika looked at him calmly, then smiled faintly. "Yes." His jaw tightened instantly. The reaction surprised even him. "Who?" he asked quickly. Malika stepped closer slightly, still calm, still elegant, then said the words that would stay in his mind for months. "I found myself." Silence, deep silence, because those words contained everything. And for the first time, Jahangir realized something horrifying. The woman he abandoned didn't break, she evolved. That night, Jahangir couldn't sleep. Not because of business, not because of stress, not because of problems, because of Malika. Or more accurately, because of the woman Malika became. He lay beside his glamorous girlfriend, staring at the ceiling in silence, but his mind kept replaying the same moment, the front door opening, Malika standing there calmly, confident, beautiful, untouchable, and most disturbing of all, happy without him. That part haunted him, because deep inside, he always believed something dangerous, that she would remain emotionally waiting for him forever, that no matter where he went or who he chose, Malika would always stay the same, safe, predictable, available. But now, everything had changed, and suddenly, he no longer felt powerful. He felt replaceable. The next morning, his girlfriend talked excitedly during breakfast. Trips, shopping, parties, luxury. But Jahangir barely listened, because for the first time, he noticed something missing. Peace. Real peace. The kind he used to feel at home before he destroyed it. Meanwhile, Malika continued her new routine. Morning exercise, work calls, studying, taking care of herself, taking care of the children, but differently now. Not like a tired servant, like a balanced woman. And balance creates beauty naturally. Jahangir started visiting the children more often. At first, he told himself it was for them, but deep down, he knew the truth. He came to see her. He started noticing small things he ignored for years. How calm her voice sounded now, how intelligently she spoke, how people listened when she talked, how naturally elegant she became. And every visit created the same uncomfortable feeling inside him. Regret. Not loud regret, dangerous regret. The kind that grows slowly until it consumes everything. One evening, while the children watched television upstairs, Jahangir stayed in the kitchen longer than usual. Malika prepared tea quietly. The silence between them felt different now. Not broken, not emotional, controlled. And somehow, that control made him nervous. "You've changed a lot," he finally said. Malika smiled slightly without turning around. "People change." Simple answer, but it carried weight. Jahangir watched her carefully. "You seem happier." This time, Malika looked directly at him, and for the first time in years, he saw something unfamiliar in her eyes. Freedom. "Yes," she answered honestly. No revenge, no attempt to hurt him, just truth. And truth hurt more, because deep down, Jahangir realized something terrifying. When he left, he expected her life to collapse. Instead, it expanded, while his own life started feeling emptier. Suddenly, the younger, beautiful woman he chased felt exhausting, demanding, temporary. Everything between them depended on excitement. But excitement cannot build a life. It only distracts people from emptiness. And now, for the first time, he understood the difference between admiration and real partnership. Malika once stood beside him when he had nothing, believed in him before success, built a future with him, sacrificed for him, and he traded all of that for temporary excitement. That realization began destroying him quietly. Days later, he arrived again to see the children, but this time he brought flowers for Malika. She looked surprised, then amused. "What are these for?" she asked calmly. Jahangir hesitated, because suddenly he felt awkward around his own wife. "I thought you might like them." Malika accepted them politely, but without emotional reaction, and somehow that hurt his ego deeply, because he expected warmth, a signal, hope. Instead, she treated him like a visitor, respectfully, but distantly. That distance drove him insane. Slowly, he started staying longer after visits, fixing small things around the house, helping the children with homework, taking out trash, offering to repair things. At first, Malika noticed silently.
Then one evening, she finally asked directly, "What exactly are you doing, Jahangir?" He looked at her for a long moment, then answered honestly, "I miss my family." Silence. Heavy silence. Because for the first time since leaving, he truly understood what he lost. Not a wife, not convenience, not routine, a real home. And now he wanted it back, desperately. At first, Malika thought it was temporary. Guilt, nostalgia, a man suddenly missing comfort after excitement faded. Because she had seen this happen before. Men leave searching for freedom, then panic when they realize freedom also means loneliness. So she stayed careful, calm, observant. Meanwhile, Jahangir's behavior changed more every week. He visited the children constantly now, sometimes without warning, sometimes with food, sometimes with gifts, sometimes with no excuse at all. And every time, his eyes searched for Malika first, not intentionally, automatically, like a man trying to find something he lost. One evening, he arrived earlier than usual. The children were upstairs, studying. The house smelled like fresh tea and baked bread, warm, peaceful, familiar. And suddenly, Jahangir felt something painful in his chest, because this house still felt like home, even after everything. Malika stood near the kitchen counter reading something on her laptop. Soft music played quietly in the background. She looked peaceful, complete, not waiting, not broken. And for the first time in his life, Jahangir truly understood a terrifying truth. A woman becomes most dangerous when she no longer needs you emotionally. He watched her silently for several seconds, then finally spoke. "I made a mistake." Malika slowly looked up, not shocked, not emotional, just attentive, because she already knew this conversation was coming. Jahangir stepped closer. "I thought I wanted something different. I thought excitement meant happiness." He laughed bitterly at himself. But excitement disappears. Silence. And then you realize you destroyed something real for something temporary. Malika listened quietly. Years ago, these words would have healed her instantly. Years ago, she would have cried and run into his arms. But pain changes people, especially pain that forces growth. Jahangir looked directly into her eyes now. "I want to come back." There it was, finally spoken. Simple sentence, massive weight. "I want my family again." For a brief moment, silence filled the entire room, the kind of silence where lives change. Jahangir waited nervously, because suddenly, the confident businessman who controlled companies and employees felt powerless in front of one woman. Malika closed her laptop slowly, then looked at him calmly. "No." One word, softly spoken, but devastating. Jahangir blinked, as if he genuinely didn't understand. "What?" "No," she repeated gently. "I can't go back to the old life." His face tightened immediately. Why? The question sounded emotional now, almost desperate. And strangely, that desperation gave Malika clarity. Because for years, she was the desperate one. Now, the roles had changed. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "When you lived here, I disappeared." Jahangir opened his mouth immediately. "That's not true." "It is. Still calm, still controlled. But I didn't notice it back then." Malika stood up slowly and walked toward the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Ironically, just like the night everything changed. My entire life became about everyone else. You, the children, the house, the business. And somewhere inside all that, I stopped existing. Jahangir looked shaken now, because for the first time, he wasn't hearing accusations. He was hearing truth, raw truth. "And now," he asked quietly. Malika smiled faintly. "Now I finally exist again." Those words hit him harder than anger ever could, because he realized something terrifying. She genuinely meant it. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't a game. She truly built a life where she felt whole without him. And suddenly, Jahangir understood the full weight of his actions. When he left, Malika thought she would stay frozen in sadness forever. Instead, she evolved beyond him. "I'll help more," he said quickly. "I'll stay home more. I'll support you. I'll change," his voice growing more desperate with every sentence. "Please, Malika, I know I hurt you, but let me fix this." Malika looked at him silently for a long moment, and deep inside, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: fear, real fear. Not fear of losing convenience, fear of losing her completely. And for the first time in their marriage began, Jahangir finally understood something. Love is not guaranteed forever. Even loyal hearts can eventually walk away emotionally.
Jahangir had never begged for anything before. Not opportunities, not money, not respect. He was the kind of man who walked into rooms expecting control, and for years, people gave it to him. Employees listened. Business partners respected him. Women admired him. Even at home, he was used to being the center, the decision maker, the important one. But now, standing in front of Malika, he felt powerless, completely powerless. And the terrifying part was this: for the first time in his life, money couldn't fix the situation, because the woman standing before him no longer needed what he could provide financially. She needed peace, and she finally found it without him. That realization shook him deeply. After that conversation, Jahangir started trying harder, much harder. Not with expensive gifts, at least not at first, because deep down, he knew gifts no longer impressed her. So instead, he tried presents, real presents. He came early to help the children with schoolwork, cooked dinner awkwardly, burned food sometimes, fixed broken shelves, cleaned the kitchen without being asked. Small things, invisible things, the kind of work Malika had done alone for years. And slowly, he started understanding something humiliating. Maintaining a family was exhausting, not physically, emotionally, mentally, constantly. There was always something needing attention: laundry, homework, groceries, cleaning, emotions, schedules, problems. And for years, he barely noticed any of it because Malika carried everything silently. One night, after the children slept, he sat alone at the kitchen table, exhausted, the sink still full, lunches still needing preparation for tomorrow. And suddenly, a painful realization hit him. Malika lived like this every single day, while helping build his business too. And instead of gratitude, he called her boring. The shame almost suffocated him. Meanwhile, Malika watched everything quietly, not emotionally, carefully, because she learned something important during the past year. People can say anything. Real change shows itself through consistency, and consistency takes time. One evening, Jahangir arrived carrying expensive shopping bags, designer clothes, jewelry, perfume, things he once believed women wanted most. Malika looked at the bags calmly, then at him. "You don't need to buy me things." Jahangir sighed tiredly. "I know." And strangely, that answer felt sincere, because now he understood this was no longer about impressing her. It was about earning her respect again, something much harder. Weeks turned into months, and Jahangir's behavior didn't fade.
If anything, he became more determined. One rainy evening, the electricity suddenly went out during a storm. The children became frightened upstairs. Jahangir immediately grabbed flashlights and candles, calmed the children, checked the electrical system himself, then spent nearly an hour fixing the problem in heavy rain outside. When the lights finally returned, he entered soaked completely, hair dripping, hands dirty, breathing heavily. And for one strange moment, Malika saw the man she originally fell in love with. Not the arrogant businessman, not the selfish husband, the hard-working young man from years ago who once built dreams beside her. Jahangir looked at her carefully, then asked quietly, "Do you still love me?" Silence filled the room instantly, because some questions are dangerous. Malika looked away first, not because she lacked an answer, because the answer scared her. Love was still there, somewhere deep beneath the betrayal, beneath the anger, beneath the disappointment. And that made everything harder, because hating someone is simple. Loving someone who hurt you is complicated, very complicated. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. Jahangir lowered his eyes slowly, but strangely, that answer gave him hope, because "I don't know" meant the door wasn't fully closed yet. And from that moment on, he became willing to do anything, anything to walk back through it.
Love returned slowly, painfully slowly, not with dramatic moments, not with sudden forgiveness, and definitely not with words, because Malika learned something important during the year he was gone. Love without respect destroys people. And she would never allow herself to disappear again, no matter how much she still loved him. Jahangir understood that too now, at least partly, because every time he tried to move closer emotionally, Malika remained careful. Kind, respectful, but careful, as if her heart now had locked doors and he was no longer trusted with the key. At first, that frustrated him. He wanted immediate forgiveness, immediate warmth, immediate restoration, but real consequences don't disappear quickly, especially emotional ones. One evening, he arrived carrying groceries after work. The children ran upstairs laughing, leaving the kitchen quiet except for the sound of rain outside. Jahangir placed the bags down slowly, then finally asked the question sitting inside him for months. "What else do I need to do?" Malika continued cutting vegetables calmly. "For what?" "For you to trust me again." Her hands paused slightly, not dramatically, just enough for him to notice. Then she continued quietly. "You think this is about trust?" Jahangir frowned. "What else would it be?" Malika finally looked at him fully, and what he saw in her eyes made his chest tighten instantly. Exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, the kind built over years. "You broke something inside me," she said softly, not accusingly, not angrily, just honestly. "And I'm still learning how to live after that." Silence filled the room immediately, because truth spoken calmly cuts deepest. Jahangir looked down, ashamed, because for the first time he understood the full damage betrayal causes, not just heartbreak, identity damage, confidence damage, trust damage. A person begins questioning everything, their worth, their beauty, their value, and he caused all of that to the woman who once loved him completely. "I know," he whispered, but even while saying it, he realized he didn't fully know, not really, because pain always hurts more for the person carrying it. Days later, Malika attended a business networking event in the city, professional, elegant, confident. And for the first time in years, people saw her as an individual, not someone's wife, not someone's mother, her. She spoke confidently during discussions, shared ideas, made connections, and men noticed her immediately. Of course they did. Not just because she was beautiful now, but because confidence changes energy completely. One businessman offered to walk her to her car afterward, polite, respectful, nothing inappropriate,
But Jahangir happened to arrive early to pick her up, and the sight destroyed him internally. Another man smiling at Malika, another man admiring her, another man seeing her value. Suddenly, he experienced something deeply uncomfortable: fear. The same fear Malika once felt when he gave attention to another woman. And for the first time, he truly understood jealousy from the wounded side. The businessman shook Malika's hand politely before leaving. Jahangir remained silent during the drive home. Too silent. Finally, Malika looked at him calmly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Classic answer, but completely unconvincing. She almost smiled faintly. "Now you understand," she said quietly. Jahangir looked at him sharply, and instantly he did understand. The insecurity, the fear, the helplessness, the horrible feeling of imagining someone else receiving the attention of the person you love. And suddenly, his past actions felt even uglier, because before, betrayal was just a mistake in his mind. Now, he finally felt its emotional weight, real weight. That night, he sat alone for a long time, thinking, and one painful truth became impossible to ignore. Malika had every reason to leave him forever, every reason. And yet, she still allowed him near their family, still spoke to him respectfully, still gave him opportunities to prove himself. That realization humbled him deeply, because forgiveness is not weakness. Sometimes it's the greatest form of strength. And Jahangir began understanding something else, too. If he truly wanted this woman back, he would need to become worthy of her again. Not through words, not through gifts, through consistency, through humility, through change. Real change. The kind that lasts.
For most of his life, Jahangir thought love was a feeling: excitement, attraction, passion, the rush people chase when something feels new. And because of that belief, he confused attention with happiness, admiration with connection, desire with love. But now, slowly, painfully, he was learning the truth. Real love is not exciting every day. Sometimes, real love looks ordinary. It looks like waking up early for someone, cooking when tired, listening even after a difficult day, remembering medicine schedules, paying bills together, supporting dreams quietly, staying, especially when staying becomes difficult. And suddenly, all the things he once called boring became the exact things he missed most. One Sunday morning, Jahangir woke up early in the guest room downstairs. The house was quiet. Soft sunlight entered through the kitchen windows. He walked toward the living room slowly, then stopped. Malika had fallen asleep on the couch while working on her laptop, glasses slightly tilted, hair loose, blanket half slipping to the floor. Exhausted, but peaceful. Jahangir stood there silently for a long moment, and something painful tightened inside his chest, because suddenly he remembered another version of her, years ago, sleeping at the kitchen table after helping pack business orders all night, holding a baby while answering customer calls, cooking dinner while studying invoices, smiling at him, even when she was exhausted herself. And back then, instead of appreciating her sacrifices, he simply got used to her sacrifices. That realization hurt deeply, because people often notice value only after they destroy it. Carefully, he picked up the blanket and covered her shoulders. Malika stirred slightly but didn't wake up fully. For a second, she instinctively leaned into the warmth, and that tiny, unconscious movement nearly broke him, because somewhere deep inside, a part of her still trusted him, even after everything. He sat nearby quietly watching the sunrise, thinking, not about business, not about money, not about success, just about life. And for the first time in years, he realized something terrifying. He built a massive company while failing at the one thing that truly mattered: protecting the person who loved him most.
Later that week, his former girlfriend called repeatedly. Messages, voicemails, questions, anger. But Jahangir barely reacted anymore, because now the relationship that once felt thrilling felt emotionally empty. Not evil, not terrible, just shallow. There was no history there, no sacrifice, no foundation, only excitement. And excitement fades quickly when real life begins. Meanwhile, every moment inside this home carried years of meaning, shared struggle, shared growth, shared survival. And suddenly, he understood why some marriages survive storms while others collapse at the first difficulty. Because true relationships are not built on feelings alone. They're built on endurance, responsibility, loyalty, daily choices. One evening, while helping his son with homework, the boy suddenly asked innocently, "Dad, are you staying with us again now?" The question hit both adults instantly. Malika looked down quietly. Jahangir's throat tightened, because children always feel instability more deeply than adults realize. The little girl added softly, "I like when everyone is here together." Silence filled the room, heavy silence, not because anyone lacked answers, because the truth carried weight. For the first time, Jahangir understood something else too. His betrayal didn't only hurt his wife, it shook his children's sense of safety, and that realization changed him further, because guilt toward adults is one thing, guilt toward your children is unbearable. That night, after the children slept, Jahangir spoke quietly. "I used to think being a good husband meant earning money." Malika listened silently. "But now I realize providing financially is the easiest part." He laughed bitterly at himself. "The hardest part is being emotionally present." Malika looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in many months, she saw something fully genuine in him. Humility, real humility, not pride pretending to change. A man finally confronting himself honestly. And deep inside, something around her heart softened slightly. Not completely, not yet, but enough to scare her, because forgiveness was beginning to feel possible. Something inside Malika had started changing again, quietly, dangerously quietly. Not because Jahangir suddenly became perfect, not because the pain disappeared, and definitely not because she forgot what he did. She remembered everything, every late night, every lie, every cold look, every moment she cried alone while he gave his attention to another woman. Those memories still existed, like scars, invisible but permanent. And that's exactly why she became afraid, because despite all of it, a small part of her heart was softening again, and softness after betrayal feels terrifying. One evening, after everyone slept, Malika sat alone on the balcony wrapped in a blanket. Cold wind moved through the night air. The city lights flickered below, quiet, distant. She stared into darkness, thinking about something she hated admitting even to herself. What if I still love him? The question alone made her angry, not at him, at herself, because she worked so hard rebuilding her life, rebuilding her confidence, rebuilding her identity, and now feelings threatened all that stability again. Jahangir quietly stepped onto the balcony holding 2 cups of tea. He hesitated slightly before sitting beside her, not too close. He learned boundaries now. That alone showed change. For a while, neither spoke, only silence, soft night silence. Then Jahangir finally asked quietly, "What are you thinking about?" Malika smiled faintly. "Dangerous things." He looked at her carefully. "Like what?" She stared forward without looking at him. "Like how easy it would be to lose myself again." Those words hit him instantly, because now he finally understood the depth of damage he caused. Before betrayal, Malika loved without fear, without calculation, without self-protection. Now, every emotion came with caution. Every soft moment came with anxiety. Every possibility of reconciliation came with hidden fear. And suddenly, Jahangir realized something painful. Even if she forgave him, a part of her innocence was gone forever. "I don't want that to happen," he said quietly. Malika laughed softly. "You didn't want a lot of things to happen." True, painfully true. He lowered his eyes, because excuses felt insulting now. For a while, the only sound was wind moving through the balcony plants. Then Malika finally whispered something she had never admitted aloud before. "When you left, I thought something was wrong with me." Jahangir looked up immediately. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes carried old pain. "I thought maybe I really was boring." The words nearly destroyed him internally, because he remembered saying them, carelessly, cruelly, in a moment of selfishness, without realizing those words would live inside her for months, maybe years. "I looked in the mirror and hated myself," she continued quietly. "I compared myself to her, younger, more exciting, more beautiful." Jahangir felt physically sick listening, because he finally understood something most selfish people realize too late. Betrayal changes how people see themselves, not just their relationship, their identity. And the worst part? The person causing the damage often moves on casually, while the wounded person rebuilds themselves piece by piece. "I'm sorry" suddenly felt like the weakest phrase in the world. Still, he whispered it anyway, not because it fixed anything, because it was true. Malika looked at him finally, long, carefully. "You know what scares me most?" she asked softly. Jahangir shook his head slowly. "That I still want to believe you." Silence, heavy silence, because trust after betrayal is complicated. People think forgiveness is the hardest part. It's not. The hardest part is risking your heart again, knowing exactly how badly it can break. And now, Malika stood at that terrifying edge. Part of her wanted distance forever, safety, independence, control. But another part, the softer part she tried hiding, still missed loving him openly, still missed family dinners without tension, still missed feeling emotionally safe beside him. And that internal war exhausted her. Jahangir looked at her quietly for a long moment, then finally said something unexpected. "If you never fully trust me again, I'll still spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. No dramatic promises, no manipulation, just honest acceptance." And strangely, that honesty touched her more deeply than grand declarations ever could. Because real change sounds quieter, more humble, more patient. And for the first time since everything collapsed, Malika allowed herself to imagine something dangerous. Maybe broken things could heal differently, not perfectly, but honestly.
Healing didn't happen in one moment. There was no dramatic reunion, no movie-like scene where everything suddenly became perfect again. Real healing is slower than that, messier, more uncomfortable, because rebuilding trust after betrayal is like rebuilding a house after a fire. Even when the flames are gone, the damage remains, and every part must be rebuilt carefully, one piece at a time. That's exactly what happens with them. Slowly, carefully, their family began changing again. Jahangir stopped trying to impress Malika. Instead, he focused on consistency, reliable actions, small daily effort, the kind of things most people ignore but relationships survive on. He learned the children's schedules completely now: doctor appointments, school projects, favorite meals, bedtime routines, things he once assumed just happened magically. Now he understood. Someone had always carried those responsibilities silently. And that someone was Malika. One evening, their daughter became sick with high fever. Years ago, Jahangir would have panicked briefly, then returned to work while Malika handled everything. But this time, he stayed awake all night beside them, bringing cold towels, checking medicine times, making soup at 3 a.m. badly enough to almost burn the kitchen. And somehow, that ridiculous soup made Malika smile for the first time in days. Not because it tasted good, it absolutely didn't, but because effort carries emotion, real emotion. At sunrise, Jahangir sat exhausted beside the couch, hair messy, eyes red from lack of sleep, still holding the thermometer nervously. And Malika suddenly remembered something she had forgotten for years. This man once had a good heart. He simply lost himself somewhere inside ego, success, and selfishness. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it complicated the hatred. Weeks passed. The atmosphere inside the house softened slowly. Not fully, but noticeably. Laughter returned sometimes. Family dinners lasted longer. The children relaxed more emotionally, because children feel tension immediately, and they feel healing too. One rainy Saturday, the electricity went out again during a storm. The children immediately grabbed candles excitedly, turning the entire evening into an adventure. Board games, flashlights, blankets in the living room, laughter, warm tea. And while watching the children laugh together, Malika suddenly felt tears forming unexpectedly. Not from sadness, from grief. Grief for the years they lost. Grief for the damage that never needed to happen. Jahangir noticed immediately. "You okay?" he asked softly. Malika nodded quickly, but he already knew, because pain recognizes pain now. Later that night, after the children fell asleep on blankets downstairs, Malika stood quietly near the kitchen window. Rain moved softly against the glass. Jahangir approached slowly behind her, still careful, still giving her space, and somehow that patience healed more than pressure ever could. "I used to think love was enough," Malika whispered suddenly. Jahangir stayed silent, listening. "But now I know, love without effort dies." He closed his eyes briefly, because that sentence carried brutal truth. Years ago, he loved her, in his own way, but love without protection, without gratitude, without presence, slowly weakens, until one day, someone destroys the very thing they once valued most. "I know," he answered quietly. Malika looked at him finally, long, carefully, then asked the question still living deep inside her fear. "What if one day you get bored again?" The question hit him hard instantly, because now he understood something painful. Betrayed people don't fear the past. They fear repetition. Jahangir stepped closer slowly, not touching her yet, just standing near enough for honesty. "I didn't leave because you were boring," he said quietly. "I left because I was selfish." Silence. Deep silence, because those words mattered. For months, Malika secretly carried his insult inside herself, thinking she failed as a woman, as a wife, as a person. Now, for the first time, he took responsibility fully, without excuses, without blaming her, without hiding behind emotions. And strangely, that honesty healed something inside her. Small, fragile, but real. The rain outside softened gradually, and inside that quiet kitchen, for the first time in a very long time, they stood together not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two wounded people trying to build something honest from broken pieces. Not perfect, never perfect again, but maybe stronger in a different way. There were moments that looked small from the outside, but change everything quietly. This was one of them.
Not dramatic, not loud. No grand speech, no movie-style music. Just a tired family, slowly learning how to breathe together again. The children had fallen asleep downstairs after the storm, blankets scattered everywhere, board games still open on the floor, half-finished cups of tea on the table. The house felt warm, alive, and strangely peaceful. Malika stood alone in the kitchen cleaning slowly, not because the house needed cleaning, because movement helped her think. Her mind had been restless all evening because something dangerous was happening inside her again. Safety. She was beginning to feel emotionally safe near him again. And after betrayal, safety feels terrifying because once you know how deeply someone can hurt you, loving them again becomes a risk, a huge risk. Jahangir entered quietly, carrying folded blankets. For a moment, neither spoke. Only soft sounds filled the room. Rain outside, distant thunder, the quiet breathing of sleeping children nearby. And something else, comfort. The kind they hadn't shared in years. Jahangir placed the blankets down slowly, then looked at her carefully. "You should rest," he said softly. Malika smiled faintly. "I forgot how." That answer hurt him more than she realized, because he remembered the woman she used to be, light, playful, relaxed. And now, even peace felt unfamiliar to her, partly because of him. He stepped closer carefully, not too fast, not demanding, just present. "I know I can't erase what happened," he whispered. Malika lowered her eyes silently. "And maybe you'll never love me the same way again." That sentence tightened something painfully inside her, because deep down, she knew it was true. The innocent version of love they once had was gone forever. But maybe adult love was different anyway. Less fantasy, more choice, more effort, more awareness. And maybe that wasn't worse. Maybe it was simply real. Jahangir looked exhausted tonight. Not physically, emotionally, like a man who spent months confronting every ugly part of himself. And somehow, Malika noticed something important. He no longer defended his mistakes. No excuses, no pride, no blaming circumstances, just accountability, real accountability. And that changed things. Slowly, dangerously slowly, it changed her heart. "You know what scared me most after you left?" she asked quietly. Jahangir shook his head slightly. "That maybe no one would ever truly choose me again." The confession came out softer than intended, more vulnerable, more honest. And Jahangir looked shattered hearing it, because he realized something horrifying. The woman who once gave him unconditional loyalty spent months questioning whether she was enough because of him. He stepped closer instinctively, then stopped himself halfway, still respecting boundaries. That small hesitation touched her deeply, because before, he used to take her emotional presence for granted. Now, he treated her heart carefully, like something fragile, something valuable. And for the first time in a very long while, Malika felt seen. Not as a mother, not as a wife, not as someone useful, but as a woman, as a person, as someone emotionally important. The silence between them softened. Warm now, not painful, just intimate. And then, without fully thinking about it, Malika stepped forward slightly. Small movement, tiny movement, but massive meaning. Jahangir froze instantly, because for months, he never pushed physical closeness, never demanded affection, never assumed forgiveness. And now, this tiny step toward him felt more meaningful than any kiss. Slowly, carefully, he opened his arms slightly, giving her a choice. Always a choice this time. Malika looked at him for one long second. Then, finally, after months of distance, she let herself lean against him. And Jahangir nearly broke emotionally right there, because the feeling wasn't excitement, wasn't passion, wasn't possession. It was gratitude, pure, overwhelming gratitude. He held her carefully, as if afraid she might disappear, and Malika closed her eyes slowly, not because everything was fixed, not because the pain vanished, but because for one quiet moment, she stopped protecting herself and simply rested inside the arms of the man who once broke her and now spent every day trying to become worthy of holding her again. Outside, the storm finally ended, and inside that house, something else ended too, the war between them. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough for hope to finally enter again.
Some relationships end loudly, with screaming, with hatred, with doors slamming shut forever. But some relationships survive differently, not because nothing broke, because both people finally understand what caused the destruction and choose every single day to rebuild anyway. That's what happened to Malika and Jahangir. Not magically, not quickly, and definitely not perfectly. The hardest part wasn't forgiveness anymore. It was learning how to love each other differently, healthier, more honestly, because their old marriage could never return. And maybe that was a good thing. Their old marriage depended on imbalance, Malika sacrificing endlessly, Jahangir receiving endlessly, one person disappearing slowly while the other barely noticed. That kind of relationship always collapses eventually. Now, everything had to change, completely. Jahangir moved back into the house slowly, not like a king returning, like a guest earning trust. At first, even small things felt unfamiliar, sharing space again, morning routines, late-night conversations, tiny accidental touches in the kitchen. All of it carried emotional tension. Not bad tension, fragile tension, like two people learning each other again after surviving a storm. And strangely, they communicated more honestly now than during most of their marriage, because pain removed pride. One evening, Malika sat working on her laptop while Jahangir folded laundry nearby, a scene unimaginable 2 years earlier. He laughed suddenly, holding one tiny pink sock. "I used to think business meetings were stressful." Malika smiled faintly. "And now? This sock has no pair." She laughed softly for the first time in days. Real laughter, warm laughter. And Jahangir stared at her for a second too long, because hearing that sound again felt like recovering something precious he once nearly destroyed forever. Meanwhile, Malika continued growing independently. That never stopped. And this time, Jahangir supported it fully. He adjusted work schedules, handled school pickups, cooked dinners badly but enthusiastically, encouraged her business projects, listened to her ideas seriously, not politely, seriously. Because now he finally understood something crucial. A strong woman is not a threat to a marriage. Neglect is. Ego is. Lack of gratitude is. One night, while cleaning together after dinner, their daughter suddenly looked at them carefully and asked, "Are you two in love again?" Silence filled the kitchen instantly. Malika almost choked laughing. Jahangir looked completely unprepared. Children really do ask the hardest questions. Finally, their son answered for them proudly. "I think they stopped fighting inside." That sentence hit both adults deeply, because children always understand more than parents think.
Not the details, but the emotions, the atmosphere, the distance, the fear, and now the healing. Later that night, after the children slept, Malika stood brushing her hair in front of the mirror. Jahangir watched her reflection quietly from the doorway, then suddenly said something unexpected. "I used to think success meant people admiring me." Malika looked at him through the mirror silently. "But now, I think success is coming home without shame." Those words stayed in the room quietly, heavy, true, because for the first time in years, he finally respected himself again, not because of money, because he became emotionally honest, and that honesty changed everything. Jahangir walked closer slowly, then asked softly, "Do you regret taking me back?" Malika looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment before answering, carefully, honestly. "I regret the woman I became when I forgot myself." Pause. "But I don't regret the woman I became after surviving it." Jahangir lowered his eyes slowly, because that answer carried both pain and strength. And maybe that was their relationship now. Not innocent anymore, not naive, but real, built from mistakes, from consequences, from painful growth. And strangely, that made it stronger than before, because now they both understood something important. Love is not what destroys marriages. Neglect does. Ego does. Forgetting each other does. And every day after that, they chose differently. Not perfectly, but intentionally, which matters more.
People think happy endings mean everything returns to normal, but real healing doesn't bring people back to who they were before pain. It creates someone wiser, stronger, more aware, and that's exactly what happened to Malika. Years passed, not dramatically, quietly, beautifully. The house changed again, not because of expensive furniture, not because of money, because peace finally lived there again. Real peace. The children grew older, louder, more independent. Family dinners became full of laughter instead of tension. And Jahangir truly changed, not temporarily, not performatively, consistently. He became present, emotionally present, the kind of father who attended school meetings without reminders, the kind of husband who noticed exhaustion before it became pain, the kind of man who no longer treated love like something guaranteed. Because once someone nearly loses their family, they either learn humility or repeat destruction forever. Jahangir learned humility deeply. But the most important transformation was not his, it was Malika's, because this time, even while loving her family fully, she never abandoned herself again. That was the difference. Every morning, she still protected time for herself, her studies, her work, her health, her peace, not selfishly, wisely, because she finally understood something many women learn too late. Sacrificing yourself completely does not guarantee love. Sometimes it only teaches people to overlook you, and Malika would never disappear inside someone else's life again, not even inside love. One afternoon, she attended a women's conference as a guest speaker. Years ago, the idea would have terrified her. Now, she stood confidently on stage, sharing her story. Not every painful detail, just the lesson. There were hundreds of women listening quietly, some successful, some exhausted, some secretly heartbroken. And Malika looked at them gently before saying, "Loving your family is beautiful, but don't lose yourself while taking care of everyone else." The room became silent instantly, because truth always creates silence first, then emotion. I spent years believing my worth depended on how useful I was to others, but the moment I started valuing myself, everything changed.
Some women in the audience started crying quietly because they understood exactly what she meant. After the event, Jahangir waited outside for her near the car, flowers in his hand again. But this time, the flowers felt different. Not guilt flowers, not apology flowers, love flowers. Simple, intentional. When Malika approached, he looked at her the same way he once did years ago, only deeper now, with respect added. And respect changes love completely. "You were amazing," he said softly. Malika smiled warmly. "Thank you." As they drove home together, sunlight filled the car quietly, peaceful silence, the healthy kind. And Jahangir suddenly asked something unexpected. "If that night never happened, if I never left, who do you think you would be today?" Malika looked out the window thoughtfully, then answered honestly, "A woman who forgot herself." The truth of that sentence settled heavily between them, because pain changed her life. But strangely, it also awakened her. And maybe that was the final lesson of everything. Sometimes life breaks people, not to destroy them, but to force them to rediscover themselves. When they finally reached home, their children ran outside laughing loudly. Jahangir smiled watching them. Malika smiled too, but this time her happiness looked different. Not dependent, not fragile, whole, because now she loved her family deeply without losing herself inside them. And that was the real happy ending. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Love your family deeply, but never forget yourself in the process, because the strongest relationships are built by two complete people, not one person sacrificing everything alone. And sometimes, the woman people underestimate the most becomes the strongest person in the room. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because some stories don't just entertain us, they remind us who we are.